Elena never thought she'd fall in love again. At 28, she had built her life carefully, balancing her career as an art consultant with a quiet love for old bookstores and morning lattes. Then she met Daniel. Charming, confident, and seemingly wealthy, Daniel walked into her life like a dream. They met at a charity gala, one of those elegant affairs with glittering chandeliers and champagne that flowed endlessly. He was impeccably dressed, a tailored navy blue suit, sharp jawline, and warm brown eyes that held just enough mystery to make her want to know more. Elena wasn't the type to be impressed by wealth. But Daniel, he wasn't like the others. He listened. He asked about her dreams, her favorite paintings, the stories she saw in brushstrokes. And when she spoke, he looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the room. Over the next few months, their romance bloomed. Daniel took her to rooftop dinners overlooking the city's skyline. He sent her morning texts with poetry that made her smile. They danced barefoot in her apartment to old jazz records. It wasn't just about the luxury. It was the way he made her feel, like she was finally truly seen. And then, one night, under a sky strewn with stars, Daniel took her hands in his and whispered, "Marry me." Elena's breath caught. She had never believed in fairy tales. But for the first time in her life, she wondered, was this her happy ending? Elena's life felt like a dream. After she said yes to Daniel's proposal, everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. He moved her into his stunning penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Her closet filled with designer dresses she had never imagined owning. Weekend getaways became spontaneous trips to Paris, Santorini, and the Amalfi Coast. Everywhere they went, people seemed to know his name. He was the kind of man others admired. Wealthy, confident, completely in control. And yet, something fell off. It started with the small things. A misplaced receipt. A conversation he abruptly changed when she asked about his business. The way he would glance at his phone and tense, as if waiting for something. One night, while brushing her teeth, Elena noticed a pair of cufflinks in the bathroom drawer. Gold, with intricate initials carved into them. Except, the initials weren't DM Daniel Mercer. They were MW. Her stomach twisted. "Daniel," she called, walking into the bedroom. "Whose are these?" His expression barely flickered as he set his phone down. "Oh, those? Probably a mix-up at the dry cleaner." Elena hesitated. A mix-up? It was a reasonable answer. But something in his tone felt too smooth, too rehearsed. She let it go. For now. The moments of doubt kept stacking up. One afternoon, while shopping for wedding invitations, Elena overheard a conversation at a cafe. Two women, seated at a table beside her, were whispering. "I swear I saw him last week," one of them said. "In that old bookstore." "Yeah. And he wasn't dressed like he usually is. It was weird. He was arguing with someone." Elena almost didn't turn around. But something, some instinct she couldn't ignore, made her glance at the woman's phone. And there on the screen was a blurry photo of Daniel. Except, he wasn't wearing his expensive suits. He looked completely different. A worn jacket, jeans with a tear in the knee. The kind of outfit he would never wear. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Something wasn't right. And for the first time, she wondered, who exactly was the man she was about to marry? Elena's fingers hovered over her phone. She could have called Daniel. Could have asked him about the photo, the strange clothes, the bookstore. Could have demanded answers. But instead, she closed the app and slipped her phone back into her purse. She wanted to see it for herself. That evening, she waited for Daniel to leave for his usual business dinner. Then, she took a taxi to the bookstore mentioned in the photo. It was a small, old-fashioned shop tucked between two brick buildings, the kind of place with wooden shelves that smelled like history and forgotten stories. Elena stepped inside, her pulse quickening. It didn't take long to find him. There, at the back of the store, stood Daniel. But he wasn't wearing his tailored suits. No luxury watch. No polished shoes. Just a worn brown jacket, scuffed sneakers, and a serious expression as he spoke to an older man. She stayed hidden behind a bookshelf, listening. "I told you, I just need a little more time," Daniel said, his voice lower, rougher than usual. The older man scoffed. "Time? You've been saying that for years. Either you tell her, or..." Daniel shook his head sharply. Not yet. Elena's breath hitched. Tell her. Tell her what? She stepped forward, her voice shaking. Daniel. Daniel's entire body stiffened at the sound of her voice. Slowly, he turned around, his face going pale. Elena, he said, his voice careful, measured, like he was choosing every word with precision. The older man beside him sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Well, I guess that solves that problem. Elena ignored him. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she took in the man standing before her. The man she thought she knew. His expensive world, his lavish lifestyle, had all been a lie? What's going on? She asked, her voice tight. Daniel let out a slow breath. Elena, I can't explain. Then explain. A beat of silence. Then softly he said, I'm not who you think I am. Elena's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Daniel hesitated. Then finally the truth spilled out. He had grown up in poverty. A childhood of second-hand clothes and eviction notices, of watching his mother struggle to put food on the table. When he was old enough, he worked, any job he could find. Stocking shelves, mopping floors, doing anything that would keep a roof over their heads. And then, one day, he met wealthy people. People who had never worried about where their next meal was coming from. People who lived in penthouse apartments, drove luxury cars, vacationed in Europe like it was nothing. And he realized, money opened doors. Money made people listen. Money made you matter. So he reinvented himself. He learned to dress the part. He taught himself to speak like them, walk like them, think like them. He built a world where no one would ever see him as poor again. Elena felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. So what? She whispered. You pretended to be rich. Daniel exhaled sharply. No, I built my life from nothing. But I exaggerated things. The penthouse, it's rented. The business dinners, some of them are real. Some of them are me trying to keep up the illusion. Elena stared at him. The truth was so much worse than she had imagined. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. She thought of the late-night conversations, the moments when she had bared her soul to him. Had any of it been real? Elena, Daniel said softly, stepping closer. Everything I feel for you is real. I swear. I wanted to tell you, but you didn't. Her voice was flat, hollow, and Daniel's expression shattered. Elena felt weightless. Not in the way she had when Daniel first kissed her, when he had lifted her off the ground in that rain-soaked embrace outside her apartment. Not in the way she had when he had whispered, I love you, his voice filled with something real. No, she felt weightless like a person falling. Like someone who had stepped out onto solid ground, only to realize there was nothing beneath them. Daniel had lied to her. Not just about money, about who he was. She had spent months believing she knew him. But now she wasn't sure she even knew his real name. Elena. His voice broke through the storm in her mind. She blinked, realizing she had been staring at him, but not really seeing him. Elena, please, Daniel said again. His voice was softer now, more desperate. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. How much of it was fake? Daniel's jaw tensed. None of it. She let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. You want me to believe that? She asked, shaking her head. After everything. His hands clenched at his sides. The feelings, the love, everything between us, that was real. Elena exhaled slowly. And the money? Daniel hesitated. Too long. And that hesitation said more than words ever could. Daniel's hesitation was enough. It told her everything she needed to know. Elena stepped back. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but Daniel felt it. His expression faltered, something breaking in his gaze. Elena, he said softly this time, as if afraid she would disappear if he spoke too loudly. She let out a breath, but it didn't feel like breathing. It felt like suffocating. 4 months, she had built a future with this man, had imagined a life together, had trusted him, had loved him. And now she wasn't even sure who he was. I need to think. The words came out hoarse, like they had clawed their way up her throat. Daniel's face fell. I don't want to lose you, he said, and for the first time his voice was unsteady. Elena swallowed. You should have thought about that before you lied to me. And then, before she could change her mind, before she could let herself be swayed by the way his eyes begged her to stay, she turned around and walked away. And Daniel let her. Because for the first time in his life, he realized some things can't be bought. And trust, once broken, it's almost impossible to fix. Elena had always thought heartbreak would feel loud, like yelling in the rain, like doors slamming, like words thrown like weapons until nothing was left but silence. But this was quiet. It was the hollow echo of her own footsteps on the pavement as she walked away from the man she thought she knew. The weight of unsaid words pressing against her chest. The realization that sometimes love isn't enough. For days, she ignored his calls. She stayed in her apartment, curled up on the couch, staring at the engagement ring still sitting on the coffee table. She should have thrown it away. Should have packed up everything he had ever given her. But she couldn't. Because no matter how much it hurt, some part of her still wanted to understand. Some part of her still wanted to believe that he hadn't meant to hurt her. And that was the worst part of all. Then, one evening, she got a call. Not from Daniel. From an unknown number. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she finally answered. And the voice on the other end made her freeze. Elena. A woman's voice. Soft, careful. I don't know if this is the right number, but my name is Margaret Williams. I think we need to talk. It's about Daniel. Elena's stomach dropped. Margaret Williams. M.W. The initials on the cufflinks. The first crack in his perfect illusion. She gripped the phone tighter. Who are you? A pause. Then, softly, I'm his mother. Elena's breath caught in her throat. His mother. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Daniel had never once mentioned his mother. Not in all their late-night conversations, not in all the times she had asked about his past. She had assumed, wrongly it seemed, that maybe he didn't have a family. But now here she was, a woman with his last name, a woman with his initials, a woman who, if she was calling Elena now, had been kept in the dark just like she had. Elena swallowed hard. How did you get my number? The woman on the other end let out a soft sigh. I saw your picture in the paper. Elena's stomach twisted. The announcement of their engagement had been the business section just weeks ago. A glossy, perfectly curated image of her and Daniel at a charity gala. She had thought it was romantic at the time. Now, it felt like a lie frozen in ink. I'm sorry for calling like this, Margaret continued. I need to see you. Elena hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to hang up. But she didn't. Because something about this, about all of it, felt unfinished. As if there was more to the story than she knew. As if Daniel's lie wasn't the only secret waiting to unravel. Fine, Elena murmured. Where? Elena sat in the quiet corner of a small cafe, fingers curled around a cup of tea she had barely touched. The door chimed softly, and when she looked up, she knew. Margaret Williams, Daniel's mother. She was an older woman, late 50s maybe, with the same warm brown eyes Daniel had, except hers carried a sadness that felt heavier than time itself. Margaret's gaze flickered over Elena, her lips pressing together as she walked toward the table. You look just like your pictures. Elena wasn't sure what to say to that. Margaret sat down, setting her hands in her lap, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. Finally, Elena broke the silence. Why did you want to meet me? Margaret let out a slow breath. Because I think you deserve to know the truth. Elena stiffened. Already know. Daniel lied about who he was. Margaret shook her head. No, sweetheart. That's not the real lie. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out an old, faded photograph. She slid it across the table. Elena picked it up with shaky fingers, and what she saw made her stomach drop. A small boy, no older than 5, sitting on the front steps of a tiny, run-down house. His clothes were too big for him. His shoes were worn, but his eyes, Daniel's eyes, were unmistakable. Margaret's voice was quiet when she spoke again. Daniel didn't just lie about being rich. He lied because he was never supposed to have a future at all. Elena felt her chest tighten. Margaret exhaled shakily. My son grew up thinking he'd never be enough, that no matter how hard he tried, the world would never let him in. She paused, eyes shining. And for years, I watched him run from the past. Run so fast, he forgot who he was. She swallowed hard, looking Elena straight in the eye. But then he met you. Elena's throat felt tight. Margaret reached for the photograph, running her fingers over it gently. I know you're hurt, and I know my son made mistakes. But I also know that he has never loved anyone the way he loves you. Elena's vision blurred, because even through all the anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, she knew it was true. Elena sat frozen, the weight of Margaret's words pressing down on her. She had spent days, weeks, trying to erase Daniel from her heart, telling herself that he had deceived her, that he had built their love on a lie, that he had chosen a fantasy over the truth. But now she was looking at a childhood she never knew existed. A boy with Daniel's eyes, wearing second-hand clothes that didn't fit. A front porch that was cracked and falling apart. A mother who had probably gone without meals so her son could eat. Elena swallowed hard. This wasn't just about money. Daniel hadn't lied to impress her. He had lied because, for him, survival had depended on it. Margaret sighed, running a hand over her face. I know he should have told you the truth. But, sweetheart, she shook her head. I don't think he ever really believed he deserved you. Elena's chest ached, because now she didn't know what to believe. She had spent so much time feeling betrayed, angry, hurt. But what if Daniel had been hurting too? What if all along he had been just as scared as she was? A lump formed in her throat. Where is he now? Margaret's lips pressed together. He left the penthouse, she admitted. He moved into a small apartment across town. I think he's trying to start over. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't sure if walking away had been the right choice after all. Elena barely remembered the drive across town. Her mind was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, hope, fear. Was she making a mistake? Was she about to walk into something she couldn't undo? By the time she reached the worn-down apartment building, her hands were shaking. This wasn't the world Daniel had pretended to be part of. No expensive cars lined the street. No doorman waited to open the entrance for her. No glass elevators whisked her up to a penthouse in the sky. Just a narrow staircase, a row of old mailboxes, and the faint hum of a radio playing in the distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she made her way to the door marked 3B. And for the first time in weeks, she knocked. The door opened. And there he was, Daniel. But not the man she had known. Not the charming millionaire in designer suits. Not the man who had taken her to rooftop dinners and whispered promises under glittering chandeliers. This Daniel looked real. His hair was messy, his face unshaven. He wore an old t-shirt, and there was a streak of paint on his forearm, as if he had been trying to fix something in the apartment. His eyes, those same warm brown eyes that had once made her believe in fairy tales, widened when he saw her. Elena, he breathed. She swallowed, her throat tight. Hi. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, Daniel stepped aside. Do you want to come in? And against every wall she had built around her heart, she nodded. Elena stepped into the apartment, and for a moment she wasn't sure what to say. It was small, much smaller than the world he had built for her. The furniture was mismatched, the walls bare except for a few books stacked along a window ledge. A half-painted wall stood in the corner, a roller tray nearby. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixing with something familiar, something that smelled like him. Daniel closed the door softly behind her. I wasn't expecting company. Elena let out a small, almost breathless laugh. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to come here. Daniel hesitated, his fingers tapping against the edge of the counter. How did you find me? Elena exhaled, turning toward him. Your mother. His shoulders tensed. She told me everything, she continued. About your past. About why you left. About why you lied. Daniel's gaze lowered to the floor. I never wanted you to find out that way. Elena folded her arms. Then how was I supposed to find out? A long silence. Then softly, I don't know. His voice was so quiet, so unlike the man she had fallen in love with. And for the first time, she realized he wasn't lying anymore. Elena watched him carefully, searching for any trace of the man she had once trusted. The one who had held her close in the early morning hours, whispering about their future. The one who had looked at her like she was his entire world, even though she now knew that world had been built on a lie. She exhaled slowly. Why, Daniel? His jaw tightened, his fingers flexing at his sides. Because I was afraid. Elena blinked. Afraid? Daniel let out a rough breath, raking a hand through his hair. I've spent my whole life trying to prove that I was more than where I came from. That I could be someone. That I could belong in a world that was never meant for me. His voice cracked slightly, and Elena felt her chest tighten. But then I met you, he continued, his eyes dark with something raw, something real. And for the first time, I wasn't pretending. Elena's breath hitched. Daniel swallowed hard, taking a step closer. I love you, Elena. I always have. And I swear to you, the only thing that was ever real in my life was us. The room felt too small, the air too thick with everything left unsaid. And for the first time since she had walked away, Elena didn't know if she wanted to run or stay. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent weeks telling herself she was done with him. That Daniel's lies had destroyed everything. That love, no matter how deep, no matter how real it had once felt, wasn't enough. But now, standing here in this tiny apartment, with peeling paint and old coffee mugs stacked in a sink, she realized something terrifying. She still loved him, and that scared her more than anything. Daniel stepped closer, his movements careful, like he was afraid that if he moved too fast, she'd disappear. I know I don't deserve another chance, he said, his voice low. And I know I can't fix what I broke overnight. Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold his gaze. But if you'll let me, he continued, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that this was never a lie. His words hung between them, heavy, thick with emotion. And for the first time, Elena didn't know what to say. Elena had spent her whole life believing that love was supposed to be simple. That when you found the right person, it should feel effortless. But Daniel had shattered that illusion. Loving him had been messy, complicated, and full of mistakes. And yet, it had also been real. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to sort through the whirlwind of emotions. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. I don't know if I can trust you again. Daniel's shoulders tensed, but he didn't flinch. I understand. Elena let out a shaky breath. I don't know if love is enough. Daniel took a slow step forward. Then let me show you that it is. Her heart squeezed, because he meant it. For the first time since she had met him, there were no carefully chosen words, no grand gestures, no expensive distractions. Just him, a man who had lost everything, except the love he was still willing to fight for. Elena swallowed hard. Then, slowly, cautiously, she took his hand. A second chance. Not because he deserved it, but because she wanted to believe in love again.